the last hour or so of the afternoon. Last year, those of us who were with us had the pleasure and the privilege of listening to Dolores tell us about Freeman Wills Crofts, and she now has returned to tell us about another author that she is equally passionate about, and that is G.K. Chesterton. So, Dolores.
Thank you very much. Hello everybody. Yes, hello. The PowerPoint works. This is G.K. Chesterton. He is a poet, a dramatist, a philosopher, a journalist, an orator, a theologian, a literary and an art critic. But of course, mainly we know him as a writer. He wrote about 80 books, several plays, several hundred poems, some 200 short stories and about 4,000 essays. Long before blogs were introduced, he virtually did a blog every week. And here are some of his books. Found in Notting Hill, The Flying In, which is all about when alcohol is banned from Britain. And one of his most famous, one of his earliest ones, The Man Who Was Thursday. Now, he was born in 1874, which makes him a little bit old for our golden age group, but he was born in Kensington. And apparently, you could actually hear the Bow Bells, so he would always refer to himself as a Cockney. Okay, if you want to know what is a Cockney. He was educated at a day school, St Paul's School. Now, this was a public school, but he could go as a day pupil. And there he is at school, and again. And he met, in that art school, he met who was to become his closest friend, E.C. Bentley, who would go on to write, of course, Trent's Last Case. The family firm, which he should have joined after school and university, was Chesterton's, who are their estate agents, and they're still going today. Yeah, but Gilbert's father wasn't really a very dedicated estate agent. He'd always wanted to be an artist. And of course, Gilbert, the young Gilbert, he was a very talented illustrator, really cartoonist. So his father pushed him to attend the Slade School, which was part of London University. Here are some of his drawings. You see, it was a lovely, very quick line, very cartoony line. They're excellent. Yeah. But the trouble is that although he went to the Slade School, all of his friends, including E.C. Bentley, and this whole group that they were really fond of each other, had all gone up to Oxford. And he was gutted, to use another word. He was very lonely, he was very depressed, he didn't do anything at art school. I mean, his drawings really don't differ throughout his life, so he obviously didn't learn anything very much. He just hung about, and certainly reading his autobiography and reading some of the things that he wrote in his essays, he really does seem to have actually suffered from depression. But fortunately, he was able to get a job, which you could seem to do in those days, just if you had the right connections, a small publisher called Redways, and then he moved to a much bigger publisher, Fisher Unwin's, the next year. And then things started to pick up for him. In 1896, he was 22, he met his future wife-to-be, Frances. And he fell in love immediately. He never did anything else but love her madly. But the whole circle that she moved in, they were part of a really intelligent, vibrant social circle, including this guy, W.B. Yeats, so there was some serious intellectual depth going on to this. And they discussed, went on a bit too fast there anyway. They discussed art and literature and religion, and he started to write. And it was first of all art reviews at first, and then in 1900 he published this, the very first book, and he illustrated it as well. Greybeards at Play, and there was more books and more comic verse and serious verse, And then, in 1890, together with his old friend E.C. Bentley, together with some of his friends, bought a magazine. And naturally, Gilbert was asked to contribute, and that's when he started writing for the press, which he did really extensively. And really, although we know him as the author of the Father Brown stories principally, he always thought and spoke of himself as a journalist. Now, sorry, can I go back? Yeah, because that didn't go. Hang on, yeah, hang on. There. That's the only photo I've been able to find of him and Francis. They both look very grumpy, I don't know why. And I presume this is round about the time they got married. Neither the Chesterton family or Francis's family, I mean, poor woman, she had the surname of Block. I mean, you'd have married anybody, wouldn't you, if you got Block? But neither family were particularly keen on the marriage, and really, you know, I can't blame her mother, because apparently when he was introduced into the Block family circle, you know, with W.B. Yeats and people like this coming and going, Mrs. Block said, "Oh, I understand you're very fond of Francis," and he didn't reply, Gilbert Keith. He just ambled over and on the new wallpaper took out a piece of chalk and started drawing a picture of Francis on it. Well, I can tell you, here, I have new wallpaper. Drawing pictures on it? No. Right. Anyway, so, well, that's them. And as you can see, he was quite a big bloke. I mean, he overshadowed Francis, but he could have never coped without her, because he was incredibly practical, and she was just wonderful. She was very understanding, she was endlessly patient, a true unsung heroine of literature. But, as I say, big bloke, he's so big in this picture, you can't even fit in the picture, you know. He was immensely tall, he was 6'4". When he died, he weighed about 20 stone, but I think he must have weighed much more than that during his lifetime. He had an enormous appetite. I mean, this isn't glands going on, this is just greed, you know. Because he'd invite, I told you Francis was a patient woman. When they lived in London, he'd invite a load of mates round, people like Hilaire Belloc and all, a gang of Fleet Street journalists, and they'd be sitting in the kitchen, swilling beer, eating sausages, demanding more bacon sandwiches. I mean, in one way it sounds like heaven on earth, you know. But, you know, you can't eat and drink as much as he did without putting a few pounds on, and he did. Yeah. But of course his size became a real rich fund of jokes. I mean, there's a famous story that in the First World War a lady said, "Sir, why are you not out at the front?" And he replied, "Madam, if you go to the side, you will see that I am." Yeah, his two of his best friends were Hilaire Belloc and George Bernard Shaw. There's a picture of them all looking as miserable as sin. Instead, I haven't got this in my notes, but it's just a private little anecdote to me. George Bernard Shaw, who's the Irish beardy bloke, was a grumpy old bugger in private life, and I know this because when my father, who's now 93, was a small boy, he used to go and scrump apples from George Bernard Shaw's orchard, just so that he and his mates would have the satisfaction of having George Bernard Shaw come out of his house, beard and stick, and go, "Arr!" You know, this was the entertainment of the afternoon. So there he is, not throwing stones at his father, but being the mate of G.K. Chesterton. But he was quite witty. I mean, Chesterton, he was a very skinny man. He was a noted vegetarian, George Bernard. And Chesterton said to him, "To look at you, anyone would think a famine had struck England." And Shaw replied, "To look at you, anyone would think you had caused it." Now, this guy, P.G. Woodhouse, who's a top favourite author of mine, He loved detective stories, and he had a great fondness for G.K. Chesterton. And there's a lovely little short story where Bertie Wooster stuck up a tree. I mean, it's complicated enough for the story. Bertie Wooster stuck up a tree, and he's suspended over a greenhouse, and the stone which he is meant to be through the window, the open window, actually falls into the greenhouse roof. And what happens is that came a sound like G.K. Chesterton falling onto a sheet of tin. And he also, on one occasion, suggested that a prize should be offered to the first aviator who was able to fly around him. This is another friend of G.K.'s. It's Father Ronald Knotts, he wrote the rules for the Detective Story Club. They're dead funny, they're very tongue-in-cheek. But he said, and they were very close friends, but he said, when he met Chesterton in life, the physical bigness of the man made him seem out of scale. He overflowed his surroundings. And the same thing is true, in a curious way, of his literary output. He never really found his medium, because every medium he tried, and oh, how many he tried, was too small a receptacle for the amount of himself that he put into it. Which I think is a very, very perceptive comment. No. And of course, as we all know, although another Francis, he's a big supporter of G.K. Chesterton, because G.K. Chesterton is probably, I'm open to correction, the only crime detective story writer who is actually a serious candidate for secthood. You know, so you can imagine a great fellow with a nice head. But I think there's something about the name Francis used to come with a pre-made predilection to support G.K. Chesterton. And C.S. Lewis, here we are, C.S. Lewis, he referred to Chesterton's theological book, The Everlasting Man. I just read it, actually, it's really good. As fundamental to his conversion to Christianity. Now that's probably not so surprising, but what is more surprising that this guy, Neil Gaiman, actually, isn't he good looking? He's a big fan as well. In his book, graphic novel actually, he based the character Gilbert, he's called character Gilbert, the book The Sandman, and that's G.K. Chesterton. And also, this book, Good Omens, which I cannot tell you how good a book this is. You know, if you haven't read it, read it. It's by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, and it's actually dedicated to G.K. Chesterton. And that's them together, because I love both of them to bits, and I thought I'd slip a picture. Now, believe it or not, this is the planet Mercury. In 2012, as you can see, there's quite a lot of literary people around there, but one of the craters on Mercury is named after Chesterton, which I think is good fun. And this is unusual, because Iron Maiden actually used some of him as one of their songs. And hopefully we've got some music. Have we got some music for it? No, it should be playing, but anyway. Look, there we go. I spent ages in bed in that track. Now, of course, although it's vast written output, what we know him for, really, is Father Brown. And, but it's a weird thing, when you pick up any book to read about Chesterton, and I seem to have been obsessed just recently, hardly any of them actually mention the Father Brown stories. And I'm not quite sure why. I think it's because there's still this snobbishness that he's not really properly serious enough. Now, there's an idea that he came to sort of dislike Father Brown, you know, because there's a famous thing that Arthur Conan Doyle came to dislike Sherlock Holmes, and Agatha Christie got a bit ticked off on occasion with Poirot. But and he probably did get a bit tired of him. And he did. There's a very much quoted remark when later in life he founded a very radical weekly review called GK's Weekly, and it was forever running out of money. And so he'd say, oh, time for another Father Brown story, and just scribble a few ideas on the back of an envelope. But the fact is, I think he wouldn't have written them, and he wouldn't have written them so well, unless he really enjoyed writing them. And there's no two ways about it, the quality does fall off, and Martin, in The Golden Age of Murder, actually recalls that, quite sadly, the very last Father Brown story was actually turned down, but his secretary, his devoted secretary, Dorothy Collins, was able to actually keep that from him. Anyway, he was, of course, as well, the first president of the Detective Club. And again, in The Golden Age of Murder, I can't think why this picture isn't up there. There's a picture of him in detective robes, and he looks immense. Yeah. Now, in an article, though, and there's a bit more Father Brown, you must have followed everything devilish close to have traced the crime. Because he did. He loved detective fiction. And he wrote an article for the Illustrated London News in 1920. And this is lovely, so I'm going to quote him for. First of all, there is evidently a very general idea that the object of the detective novelist is to baffle the reader. The Bulgarian governess is just about to mention her real reason for concealing herself with a loaded rifle inside the grand piano when a Chinaman leaps through the window and cuts off her head with a yagatan. A yagatan is a Turkish scimitar with a double curved blade. And this trivial interruption is allowed to defer the elucidation of the whole story. Now, it is quite a simple matter to fill several volumes with adventures of this thrilling kind without permitting the reader to advance a step in this form of fiction, also in the direction of discovery. This is illegitimate on the fundamental principles of this form of fiction. It is not merely that it's not artistic or that it's not logical, it's that it's not really exciting. People cannot be excited except about something, and at this stage of ignorance the reader has nothing to be excited about. People are thrilled by knowing something, and on this principle they know nothing. The true object of an intelligent detective story is not to baffle the reader, but to enlighten the reader, and to enlighten him in such a manner that each successive portion of the truth comes as a surprise. In this, as in much nobler types of mystery, the object of the true mystic is not merely to mystify, but to illuminate. The object is not darkness, but light in the form of lightning. Now, what Chesterton is asking, therefore, is the truth. And, of course, Father Brown, like all good detectives, uncovers the truth. And the truth, in the best of the Father Brown stories, is always wonderfully unexpected. And that quality of unexpectedness probably goes back to the very origins of Father Brown. And Chesterton, in his autobiography, recalls it was in 1904, the first Father Brown collection was 1911, but in 1904 he was on a visit up into Yorkshire, and with some friends he met Father John O'Connor, and here we are, yes, it's working, there's a picture. Father O'Connor was become a very lifelong friend, and on this walk over the moors, Chesterton had mentioned that he was about to write an article, one of the many, about what he referred to as some rather social, sordid questions of vice. And at this point, Father John intervened. He said, you're wrong. And Chesterton says, to prevent me falling into a mare's nest, he told certain facts he knew about perverted practices. I must admit, this sets your mind racing. About perverted practices that I should certainly not set down here. And you think, oh, shame. I have not imagined that the world could hold such horrors. When we returned to the house, we fell into conversation with two very hearty Cambridge students who began to discuss music with Father O'Connor. And when the priest had left the room, the two young men broke into generous expressions of admiration. And then one of the students said, well, all the same though, I don't believe this sort of life is right. He's shut up in a cloister and he knows nothing of the real world. Chesterton said, he nearly burst out laughing because he knew that compared to these two students, the priest, knew so much more, and the two students were like two babies really, just didn't know anything. So he was transfixed by this contrast. And obviously in the Father Brown stories, that's what keeps on tripping people up time and time after again. Now, Father O'Connor was Irish. He was very quick-witted and quite a delicate, small man. but he was very, very physically adept. Now, obviously, that's a complete contrast to Father Brown, who's, obviously Chesterton can't really decide where he comes from, because sometimes he comes from Essex and sometimes he comes from Suffolk, you know. And I would just say, I've never known a priest so well travelled as Father Brown. He seems to pop up absolutely anywhere, and anywhere he does pop up, people immediately murder each other. So you can have, like the last rites and a murder all at the same time, you know. It's economical. Now then, of course, and we all know characteristics of Father Brown, you know, he can't fold his umbrella, he drops his parcels, etc., etc. And I think this is all to do with the fact that he's not very like Sherlock Holmes. Also, I think he owes a lot to this guy. And this guy is St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, Chesterton didn't become a Catholic until 1922, but he'd always been drawn to Catholicism and actually read the Theologica, some of the Theologica by Aquinas. It's absolutely a massive book. It's 3,500 pages long, and his love of St. Thomas, and there he is holding some of it, I think, but only a couple of pages. His love of St. Thomas stayed with him all his life, and in 1933, he died in 1936, he published, I think, what was probably his favourite book of all, and it was a biography of St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, it's absolutely firework of a book. It gained great critical acclaim, and its secretary, Dorothy, used to say that he would turn around and say, shall we work on a little more Tommy? He absolutely loved it to bits. And if you want to find out about Thomas Aquinas, don't read it. It won't tell you a thing. It tells you a great deal about Chesterton and how much he loves Thomas Aquinas. You will not, for instance, find a careful discussion of Aquinas' 5 proofs for the existence of God. You know, you'll find an awful lot about why Chesterton thinks Thomas Aquinas is such a mean bloke. Yeah. Now, physically speaking, Aquinas and Father Brown don't have much in common. Aquinas was a really big bloke. He was obviously rather like Chesterton, but not so fat. I imagine he didn't drink so much beer. But he was nicknamed the Ox, and because he was, and this is a Father Brown characteristic, because he was quite absent-minded, he was nicknamed the Dumb Ox when he was young. And Chesterton tells us about this picture by an Italian artist, Ghirlandaio. Yeah. And this is his commentary on the picture. He says, Aquinas is here shown as being absent-minded, but look at his eyes, because in those eyes there is a fire of inward excitement, as the man is evidently thinking about something. Now, in the second Father Brown story, which is this one, The Secret Garden, a headless man is found in the garden of the chief of the French police. Now, when Father Brown twigs what's happening, remember the inward excitement bit of Aquinas? Well, Father Brown displays more inward excitement than anything. He sprang stiffly to his feet and was holding his temples tight like a man in sudden and violent pain. "Stop, stop, stop," he cried. "Stop talking a minute, for I only see half. Will God give me strength? Will my brain make one jump and see all? I mean, good grief, just stop and think, mate. Heaven help me. I used to be fairly good at thinking. I could paraphrase any page in Aquinas once." Now, what follows in The Secret Garden is not theology, or, well, I suppose it is in a way, but like applied theology, as we find out why exactly there is a headless man in the garden, you know. But it's a very good story. Because it makes sense. It's bizarre and macabre, but it does make sense. Anyway, back to Aquinas for a minute. Chesterton said about Aquinas, he was interested in the souls of all his fellow creatures, but not in classifying the minds of any of them. In a sense, it was too personal, and in another sense, too arrogant for his particular mind and temper. Now then, this story from the incredulity of Father Brown, Miracle of Moon Present, we meet a soon-to-be murdered American millionaire who doesn't share these views. All sorts of stories about the millionaire. All sorts of stories and legend were told of the miraculous rapidity with which he could form a sound judgment of human character. He selected his wife by picking her out of a regiment of women in uniform. And another story was told of 3 tramps, indistinguishable from each other in their filth and rags, who presented themselves for charity. Without a moment's hesitation, he sent one to a hospital for nervous disorder, recommended the second to an inebriate's home, and engaged the third at a handsome salary as his own private servant. And incidentally, although Chesterton liked Americans very much and really enjoyed his American tours, and obviously wrote about them, he wasn't a fan of American millionaires. In The Arrow of Heaven it said, "It is to be feared that about 100 detective stories have begun with the discovery that an American millionaire has been murdered, an event which for some reason is always treated as a calamity." Anyway, Warren Wine, the American millionaire, is bumped up. Judgment's character eventually brings him to a sticky end, and Father Brown says, "These tramps that stood before him were dismissed rapidly, left and right, to one place and another, as if for them there was no cloak of courtesy, no stages of intimacy, no free will in friendship, and 20 years has not exhausted the indignation born of that unfathomable insult in a moment when he dared to know them at a glance." And, you know, that is such a fictional working out of the 14 Canon Aquinas. And Chesterton says that those who knew Aquinas were impressed by his tranquil manner, his excellent common sense of everyday words and actions. Now, Father Brown is often, especially when he's in the throes of detection, is not tranquil, but he does display common sense. And he said, now, it's what I call common sense. It's more natural to believe a preternatural story that deals with things we don't understand. Tell me that Gladstone, in his last hours, was haunted by the ghost of Parnell, and I will be agnostic about him. But tell me that Gladstone, when first presented to Queen Victoria, wore his hat in a drawing room, slapped her on the back and offered her a cigar, then I'm not agnostic at all. That's not impossible, but it's incredible. Now, the title of the 4th collection, there's 5 Father Brown books altogether, is The Secrets of Father Brown. But the real secret of Father Brown is that when he has an Aquinas-like fit of abstraction, you know, stained glass windows and looking up to the skies, all the other people in the story thinks he's having some sort of mystic experience and he's about to solve the mystery through divine inspiration. He's not, you know, but this is just atmosphere. I mean, Hercule Poirot gets abstracted and so does Lord Peter Wimsey, but we don't think they're in the grips of religious abstraction or moving into religious ecstasy. No, it's just atmosphere. Now, St. Thomas says that he was willing to begin by recording the facts and sensations of the material world. There was a new motive for beginning with the most material and even with the meanest, that means lowest, things. Now, that look at the material evidence, that's virtually a golden age detective's chart, you know, little bits, you know, the footprints in the butter or whatever it is. You know. So Father Brown is, just like Poirot, and just like Thomas Aquinas for that matter, not having divine revelations, but actually using his little grey cells. Right, thank you. Any questions? We've got 2 minutes apparently. Any questions? Come on, I know loads about Chesterton, much more than that. Let me share.
That's hugely entertaining, Dolores. Thanks so much. But I am so disappointed that we didn't hear the Iron Maiden. So I wondered if you could perhaps give us a...
I've actually got it on the phone.
I actually wanted you to sing it.
I'm saying, do me a favour. Hang on. Iron Maiden, yeah. Recently I did. Go on. Oh, I put my phone on silent. Yeah.
An abstracted murder.
There you go. Oh, hang on, it needs to wind on a bit, doesn't it? Oh, let that play. Oh, catch you later. It's editable. Yeah.
Do you have a favourite story or stories?
I think it's probably The Secret Garden, the one I referred to, because dead headless bodies turn up all over the place, and it's just brilliant. Yeah, but one of the things I absolutely love about the Father Brown stories is, in a way, a bit of a fault. There's an awful lot of description. The scene setting is fabulous. Agatha Christie was enormously perceptive, really picked up on this when she wrote a spoof of Chesterton, Father Brown story for a collection of Partners in Crime. And there's so much colour in that short story. And there's mist and there's fog, but there's, things leaving out fog. Not at all a Christie story, but a brilliant take-off of the sorts of elements that go into a Father Brown story. Highly recommended. But yeah, watch out for the colours. I think that's when you can see that he really did, love and study art. Yeah, thanks for that. Right, I've got a notice saying stop, so thank you.